Hello, I am Katerina Androna. I am General Manager in European Expression, NGO from Greece. I'm working in European Expression for 21 years old, and we are really happy that with the FREI project, Stefan, it's the new echo for us in order to collaborate with Foster Europe. Our colleague Pyros Merkouris is here as project manager, but I am here today and also to say some things about our organization. It is a kick-off meeting. It is the first time that all partners be here. I think it's very important to know each other. So, some things about European Expression. First slide, please. Okay. European Expression is an NGO that founded in 1999 by scientists and active citizens in Greece, of course. It is a non-profit organization. It has today, 2025, 100 employees. It has ISO certifications, annual financial audit. Our objectives promote dialogue aimed at state modernization and European consequences. Promote the European idea and integration, of course. Protect the environment, support sustainable development, address climate crisis and change. Protect vulnerable groups, encourage volunteerism. Our work over the years, a long-standing record of public dialogue events and think tank activity for over 35 years. Activism for a united Europe. Publication of a magazine, European Expression, for 28 years. Creation of youth networks, festival, campaigns and awards related to volunteerism, civil society, environmental education and forest protection, patient, consumer, passenger, refugees, child rights, youth exchanges, etc. For 2025, European Expressions has many projects. First of all, operation of shelters for unaccompanied minors. We have 2 shelters in Athens, named Kypseli. The coordinator of shelter of Kypseli, Mrs. Anna Kavouri, is today with us, and the other shelter named Inoi. Our aim is to provide accommodation, protection, and support to unaccompanied minors aged 12 until 18 years old. Through this project, we offer services for daily care, living support, empowerment, social integration, and gradual autonomy. Program starts in March 2019. Boys aged 12 to 17 and girls in the 16-plus shelters. Structure capacity, 30 places per shelter. Operating 24/7. Accommodation, meals, clothing, consulting, support, education, legal issues, healthcare is some of the things that we give to our participants. Main goal, ensuring an adequate framework for protection and care, as well as a smooth transition to adulthood and the labour market for unaccompanied minors. Also, we have management-supported semi-independent living for unaccompanied minors 16+. Through semi-autonomous living, we aim to support and empower unaccompanied minors in the transition to adulthood. The program focuses on goal setting, self-confidence building, self-sufficiency, skill development, decision-making, capacity, and personal growth. I'm continuing. Compass, another project, a MIF project as well. The project aims to provide parallel support to the protection mechanisms for unaccompanied minors through the creation of mental health facilities, continuous training of professional, minor accompaniant and care services, and the development of educational materials. Theory of Change, a MIF project. Connected Kids to Causes. The Theory of Change program aims to facilitate languages learning in the host country, the children with a migratory background, and to promote the understanding of values such as civic education, human rights, equality, justice, and respect for the environment. Daphne, group home for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. The group home, as a psychological rehabilitation unit, aims to place and provide psychiatric monitoring for beneficiaries in living spaces, therapy, and support settings. E-Youth, Strengthening Youth and Democracy in Europe, we aim to create a collaboration platform for non-governmental organizations from 5 countries to develop the skills of young people, promote their active participation in politics, and foster democratic values among individuals. And the last one, the FREI project that we will collaborate with all of you. Thank you very much. Pyros?
that the miners are migrants?
Yes, refugees.
Refugees.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Is there any element on the path itself? So, what would you address in your local path? What are the themes? Yeah? Will you do present? Are you presenting this? Yeah. Please. Pyrrhus, our dear friend and partner, please.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Pyrrhus Merkouris, and as I've introduced myself, I think already this morning, I'm from Athens, Greece, but I lived in London for 40-odd years, so I'm also British. Before you start throwing potatoes at me for Brexit, that's not my fault. I voted Remain. Anyway, I'm going to discuss to you a little bit about the background of Greece and how that background, to some extent, continues to haunt the country and how psychologically it has affected it. So, modern Greek history from crisis to democracy. And before I begin, I wish to thank my colleague Fotis Kisaseki over there. He's a very shy boy, and instead of him talking, I'm talking. But afterwards, you will be encouraged to ask Fotis questions during lunch breaks and tea breaks and any time during the course of this project. I want to just say, before I do start, this is an innovative project. It's got a lot of interesting things to it, especially from a Greek point of view, because we have our fair share of skeletons in our cupboard, a lot of things that we don't like dealing with. And at the current point in Greek society, there is an upstake, there is an increase in xenophobia and racial intolerance. And dealing with that is, to some extent, requires an analysis of the past. And the past, Greek past, is very traumatized. It's a society, Greece, once upon a time I used to say, and I think Erasmus, you and I know each other a little bit, I told you once that Greece is a country imprisoned by her heritage. In many, many ways, whatever we do in Greece, the heritage is always there. It's staring at us. We've got the Acropolis looking down on us. Democracy, right? We take our orders from the Acropolis. But at the same time, the country is blood-stained. Wars, invasions, repressions, death, and it keeps resurfacing. So that's something that you have to bear in mind when you work with Greece. And this project is very interesting because it's going to deal with a lot of those issues, a lot of things that have happened. Now, let's get on with the project. Can you move on a bit? Now, the 1929 crash in the rise of extreme right in Greece, that's a starting point where we can start. We're going back a long way. Indeed, arguably, you can go back even further. You can go back to 1922 with the refugee crisis. Indeed, you can go back even further when you had the schism in Greece between what is monarchy and what is republic. So, in 1929, you get the Wall Street crash. We get a Republican government is in power. Things start to go wrong because of the Depression and the issues that arises. And in northern Greece, there is the famous tobacco strike, for example, which is an issue that develops a sort of extremist ideology, left-wing, right-wing, all sorts of things. You can ask me questions, you can ask us questions about that later, because they're actually quite interesting and fascinating, how the Greek mind operates and thinks and works. There is a religion involved, there's a lot of things involved. And this rise of authoritarianism is in some way putting a lid on a very rebellious population. Indeed, I would argue, as a British person, looking at a Greek population, with my foreigner's insight of Greece, that you are dealing with a rather rebellious population, a population that takes its orders from the Acropolis. Next slides. After the First World War, we had... that's all right.
It works.
Okay, thank you. After the First World War, we had the catastrophe of the war in Asia Minor with Turkey. A very complicated and difficult topic to discuss. The war with Turkey also involved a civil war. My grandfather was a Republican, but Greece was at that particular point in time led by monarchists. So Granddad was to be executed. So Granddad fled the battlefield. So it's a very complicated issue, and 1.5 to 2 million people emigrated. The population of Greece was 3.2 million. By the time the emigration took place, it was over 5 million. And of course, it also meant an awful lot of Turkish population was also sent to live in Turkey, whatever Turkish and whatever it means to be Turkish or Greek. It was actually divided according to religion. If you were Orthodox Christian and you spoke Turkish, you went to Greece. If you were a Muslim but only spoke Greek, you went to Turkey. So it was not actually an ethnic division. Ethnicity was defined religiously. And of course, when the migrants came to Greece, if you can call them, I'll call them refugees, when they came to Greece, they set up, where were they going to live? So there was, the cities expanded massively. There was a lot of shanty towns and poverty-stricken dwellings. It was a pretty grim situation. However, one can say that the refugees that came to Greece, many of them were very well educated. Aristoteles Onassis, who later becomes a ship owner, he came to Greece penniless. Okay, he had rich family, but he pulled it together. Alexandros Isigonis, the mechanical engineer who designed the Mini and the Morris Minor in Britain, famous cars, he was one of these refugees. The Ionian Greeks were quite well educated, and they brought their culture, their music, but it was a breeding ground for social and political turbulence and traumas and all sorts of things. I will go on a bit. In 1933, of course, you get the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany. And of course, this stimulated in Greece, and not just in Italy, Spain, and Hungary and elsewhere, a certain amount of extreme right-wing politics. Now, in Greece, there was anti-Semitism. There is a history in Orthodox Christianity, Tsar Nicholas II, for example, blaming Jews and pogroming them, of anti-Semitism. In Greece, from what I have been led to believe, there wasn't that much going on, but it was there. Don't underestimate it. The ultra-extreme right-wing group looked towards Germany, to Adolf Hitler, rather than to Benito Mussolini. Because of the Depression of 1929 and the Wall Street crash, there was a phenomenal amount of poverty in Greece. All prices, the Greek economy to some extent, the cash crop was tobacco. So that collapses in terms of price. So there's a lot of hunger. And the government decided, the Republican government decided to do some radical things. However, Greek politics has a lot of political interference coming from other countries, specifically Britain was having none of it. The British wanted Greece to carry on, and there was a kind of coup d'etat. Again, I can talk into complexities there, and my friend Fotis Kisas will elaborate on that. So we get the 4th of August coup d'etat led by Metaxas, which is ultra-nationalistic, bans opposition groups, shoots the trade unions, hang the journalists, kill the poets, wipe everything out. It's a pretty ferocious, put Pyrrhus Makouris' granddad in jail. So it's a pretty difficult period, and they come to power. However, there is a lot of opposition to it. One of the things this project is looking at is youth. A lot of young people disliked it. Youth did not embrace the 4th of August coup. And I can talk about that again later if anybody wants to discuss it. There's a few examples I can talk to you about. Culture is very important. Music is a powerful communicator. When I was telling you about the refugees, they bring their music with them, rembetiko music. It's a powerful, again, Fotis, in his excellent document, can discuss to you about the importance of culture and how culture can resist fascist and dictatorial thoughts, because it's a powerful communicator. Simsa died on me. Parties were dissolved, use of torture and exile of dissidents. A lot of the Greek islands were used as places of exile. The island of Ikaria, for example, was used. Inspired by Mussolini's fascism, Mussolini came up with the idea of the corporate state. So that was very much pushed on. There was, it's a bit debatable for me that, because they took on board the fascistic ideas, but at the same time, the Dodecanese Islands, these are islands in Greece like the island of Rhodes, were under Italian control. And Mussolini had aspirations about the islands of Corfu and Zante and Cefaloni. He wanted to gobble those up. So there was a lot of ambivalent behavior towards Mussolini versus the Greek fascist movement. I think they tended to look a little bit more to Hitler, personally speaking. That's debatable. And a lot of the racist ideas are imported into Greece as a result. Also, racist ideas, not just towards Jews, but towards black African people as well. And against homosexuality, communists, Roma, all of that was forbidden, all wrong. Okay, so we're entering the Second World War now, and in many ways, in my opinion, and again, this is up for debate, the Second World War is very much a shadow. Yes, casts a very long shadow, and we still live under it. What happened during World War II is a wound that festers and doesn't seem to heal. Anyway, there is the war between the Greeks and the Italians. Mussolini decided to attack Greece, one fascist state attacking another fascist state. So they had their old ding-dong war. Interestingly, in order for the Greek states to somehow defeat the fascists, they had to liberate a lot of anti-fascists. So people like my grandfather were liberated and sent to the front to fight, and did so zealously. It became almost like a religious duty to fight fascism. It's difficult to understand how in the 1930s, during the Metaxas regime, I think it was rejected by the many-headed multitudes. The population rejected it and zealously fought against fascism, which I think is a good thing. It didn't embrace it. And then, okay, there is a view by many historians that in order to save Mussolini's humiliating defeats in the Balkans, the Nazis, Adolf Hitler, invaded Yugoslavia and Greece, and this saved time, gave the Soviet Union a few weeks extra, which saved it during the Battle of Moscow. That's a debatable thing, but it's something that, certainly in Britain, is taken as given. And again, we begin the Second World War and what happens. I want to go on to the next. I don't know what I do. German occupation. The German occupation in Greece, or the fascist occupation, remember we already had a fascist regime in Greece, so there was no lack of collaborators. They were there. And that figure there, 300,000 Greeks died from famine, that's probably a gross underestimate. Not probably, it is a gross underestimate. Nobody really knows how many died. the refugee population from Anatolia. We don't really know how many died. On the islands, because fishing was banned, they were not allowed to fish and therefore sustain themselves. In many of the islands, more than half the population died. So it was a pretty disastrous experience for the population. One of the reasons why the famine was so extreme is when the German and Italian armies occupied Greece, the harvest had just been taken in. All the grain, all the food, all the tobacco. Well, it was all sequestrated to feed the armies and to feed Germany and Italy and elsewhere. So the population was left with no food. The famine was so severe that during the Second World War in Britain, the Quakers, they're a religious group, they set up something called Oxfam, Oxford to relieve the famine in Greece. And they bought grain from Turkey. And interestingly, the grain could not be imported from Turkey to Greece until Benito Mussolini told Hitler, you better let the grain in because we're not going to have any people left. So there you are. So from 1942, armed resistance group began to spring up. And there you have the Gorgopotamos sabotage. This is considered the first serious attempt at major resistance in Greece, where the railway line was blown up. Indeed, all the bridges and practically all the infrastructure was blown up in Greece. By the time the Second World War ended, the infrastructure was destroyed. Specifically to minority groups now, one of the skeletons in the Greek cupboard, in my opinion, one of our many skeletons, is the wipeout of the Jewish population. Again, 83% of the Jews killed. Again, I think that's an underestimate, personally speaking, because births, marriages, and deaths were not that thorough in Greece. Again, that's something that you can ask, and I can explain it. But the Jewish population, there was anti-Semitism. The Jews have all the money, rubbish. There was that. The Nazis had no problem finding collaborators. They were already a developed fascist movement in Greece. And the roundup of the Jews is a very complicated and difficult issue, and maybe something that this project will help us examine. It's also a sore point for the Jewish population that is living in Greece. Those who, in order to carry out that pogrom actually made money. The property of the Jews was sequestrated and sold. And therefore, the transportation of the Jews to the death camps, money was made. Now, who collaborated is something that is very difficult to discuss in Greek society, because there was never any justice done after the Second World War. And again, you can talk to me about that, ask us about that. Now, regarding the Roma, people tend to forget about the Roma. Before the Second World War, the Roma were an established community in Greece. They were not the impoverished population that you see today. They were not the psychologically destroyed population that you see today. They were kind of wealthy. Again, you see photographs of Roma. Their women were covered in gold and silver. That was their bank. You get money, you turn the money into jewelry, and you cover the lady with money. Of course, that means the fascists are here, let's grab and steal all the money and kill the Roma in the meantime. So that was devastating. Religion. Greece, by and large, is an Orthodox Christian society. The religious authorities did not cooperate with the Nazis. They didn't get on. And there were many examples of priests who simply just refused to go along with the whole fascistic experiment. which is interesting. As I said, there is a history of anti-Semitism within Orthodox Christianity, and I think that's one of the better optimistic elements, that the Orthodox Church did not collaborate in the pogroms that took place in World War II.
When did he condemn Nazis?
About end of 1942, 43. But there were also other examples. The Archbishop in the island of Zakynthos, when he was, because they knew there was a large Jewish population there, he said, I am the only Jew in Zakynthos. So, local collaboration and post-war justice. As I said, there was no lack of collaboration in Greece. We already had a vibrant fascist movement in Greece. A member of my family, for example, was a militant fascist. So, and he carried on. Interesting person. If you want to ask me about him afterwards, I will talk to you about him. And when the Second World War was over, well, actually during the Second World War, the British came to Greece, and then a deal was made with the resistance movements. Lay down your arms, there will be elections. But unfortunately, the British did their usual two-faced neo-colonialist tricks. And I can talk to you about, as a British person, exactly what they did. That there are parallels to what happened in Ireland with what happened in Greece, which are never discussed. But again, that's something that we can look at. We'll see about the project later, because this is an international project, and it can touch on all sorts of things. Well, the political prisoners after the war were mostly from the left, absolutely, indeed. If my father's uncle had not died in 1943, I wonder what they would have done with him. Probably given him a medal. Occupation and resistance. Well, the Civil War and political polarization. When the war was over, the communists, who led the bulk of the resistance in Greece, we talked about the Orthodox Church, but the vast bulk of the resistance was led by the Greek Communist Party. And there was a war between the royalists and the monarchists. The British wanted the Greece to be a monarchy, because the monarchy in Greece was related to the British monarchy, and the British were very much... Greece arguably was a neo-colony of the British Empire, in my frank opinion. And there was a so-called civil war in Greece that led to 158,000 killed. The resistance group had thought they had come to an agreement with the British in February 1945 when they handed over their weapons, thinking that there would be an election. And what happened was the British released all the former fascists and armed them and began a pogrom. A former fascist, or I wouldn't call him a former fascist, a fascist, was a man called Yorgos Grivas, who had led a death squad in Athens, a fascist death squad. He then led a fascist death squad for the British, afterwards for the CIA, and afterwards he went to Cyprus and formed a political party called EOKA, and led a resistance against the British. I have never met a British person who had a clue that Grivas was a former fascist, who had been paid by Churchill, and I do not know Greek Cypriots who have a clue that George Grivas was a fascist. This is something sad, yeah, because there we are. So that was going on, and once again, there was an awful lot of political... Well, I can talk about the so-called Civil War. After the communists handed over their weapons and they were being repressed again, they fled into the mountains, and Tito of Yugoslavia gave them weapons so they could carry out a resistance. Joseph Stalin had made an agreement with the British that Greece belongs to Britain. And according to the Yugoslavs, Stalin lost his temper with Yugoslavia because they were supporting a communist uprising in Greece. And he told them, seal the border, stop the supplies. And within 3 months, the communists in Greece lost the plot, and that was the end of them. So that was the end of the Greek communists and the so-called civil war. So how far it was a civil war is a moot point. It was probably just a repression, in my opinion. Refugees in Rome are caught between both sides, absolutely. And people were being drafted into the army to fight each other, which they really didn't want to do. What happens in Greece at that particular point in time is that new weapons are used and experimented with. For example, napalm, the use of jet fighters, helicopters. These were the American fleet and things like that, which are then exported and used in Korea in a big, big way. So one war leads to another war. That's one thing that we can learn from these things. Okay. After the Civil War is over, you get monarchy, you get right-wing government. There's a lot of emigration from Greece. A lot of Greeks just pack their bags and say, anywhere's better than here. I'm going to Australia, I'm going to USA, Canada. So a lot of Greeks emigrated. But little by little, again, there is this attitude of resistance in Greece. A younger generation came along, and by 1963, you do get a government that is, I wouldn't call it socialist, but anyway, it's not monarchist. It's led by George Papandreou, who had a history of republicanism to him. So he comes to power. The Greek monarchy doesn't like him, fears him, and there was a lot of pulling and throwing within the government, and in 1965 it's overthrown. During this period, in the 60s, Greece does go through a period of economic development. You get Marshall aid. You get a lot, well, Marshall aid. That's a tricky topic. My mother, okay, I'm digressing now. My mother worked for Greek shipping. So she knows what happened to the Marshall aid. She knows who the black marketeers were in the Second World War. She knows who profited during the Second World War, and a lot of the families, the rich and powerful families, made a lot of money out of the Second World War because they controlled the black market. They were the ship owners. And she worked for them, and she saw what they were doing. And a lot of the Marshall aid also included offloading Liberty ships. What is a Liberty ship? The Americans in those days were engineering scientific geniuses. They could build a ship in a day. And these were huge 10,000-ton giant ships, and they thought they would only survive a couple of months. They offloaded them and gave them for free to the Greek ship owners who worked, and therefore Greece became a shipping power. And Greek ship owners, especially in those days, were heavily tied to British bourgeoisie, let's call it that. They were very tied to the British City of London and banking system. And my mother, who in the 1950s worked in the City of London, worked in Greek shipping, she witnessed how it operated. So there was I've digressed here, but the Greek ship owners, the Greek monarchy, they believe in patronage and privilege. They don't want this left-wing government coming in. And suddenly there is prosperity in Greece because of tourism, because the jet plane is invented, because Yves Saint Laurent likes the island of Mykonos. And he thinks it's, and suddenly Greece becomes chic. They don't want the political sort of left-wing government coming to power. There's a row within the Greek ruling class. You get the junta taking power in April 1967. That's the so-called colonel's regime. The junta that seized power in 1967 was to a large extent organized by the CIA, and we had, in 1990s, Bill Clinton apologized for that, but anyway, they seized power, and it was done also with the help of the monarchy. But there is a falling out between the monarchy and the colonels, they're called the colonels regime, and the monarch, ex-King Constant, he fled to Britain. If you take a look at who the officers, the military officers of the junta were, Papadopoulos, Nia, Ioannidis, Patakos, all of them had been members of the so-called security battalions during the Second World War. They had been members, in other words, of fascist death squads. And they had been put in power, they had been put in control of the Greek military. So they were that was where they came from. Hardcore fascists. Okay, so you get press censorships, books are banned. It's some of the books that are banned. I mean, these include ancient Greek, Aristophanes, homosexuality is banned, long hair is banned, women have to wear skirts, they're not allowed to wear trousers. It was absurd. However, you get that there guy is Mikis Theodorakis. What is interesting, again, is the power of arts and culture. Arts and culture is a powerful communicator and is used in many ways as a tool of resistance. And again, that is something that this project can investigate, and we've tried to do that. We will publish something on that. So there is a lot of resistance, especially through the arts and culture. And you get in 1973, the Athens Polytechnic, the law faculty, begins an uprising, again, young people, and it snowballed. There was a snowball effect. One of the casualties of the snowballing of the resistance is the dictatorship. The colonel said, how do we keep the lid under control? Well, we nationalistic Greece, let's organize a merger between Greece and Cyprus, and we can become heroes. So there was a coup d'etat against Archbishop Makarios, the president of Cyprus. They overthrew it. Again, Henry Kissinger had a very dubious role. Indeed, he was behind it in some ways. You remember I mentioned to you George Grivas, the guy who led a fascist death squad in Athens during the Second World War, and then later ended up doing a resistance in Greece. Kissinger went to Cyprus, spoke with Grivas's disciples for about just 30 minutes, 40 minutes, killed Makarios. He flies to Turkey, tells the Turks, if this fails, wipe them out. So it all came afterwards in the trials of various individuals like Nikos Samson and people like that. So anyway, it was a very grim business, the collapse of the junta. Cyprus was a huge casualty, and in 1975 we get a new, from resistance to European integration, I suppose, you can say we get a sort of republic developing. In 1971 we do get a proper constitution at last. It is a republic, and the constitution does have safeguards, human rights and proper things. In 1981, Andreas Papandreou is elected. It's a very progressive wave, and a lot of things that should have been done are done now, but should have been done long ago, like gender equality, for example, healthcare, National Health Service, free education, and by now, in the 1980s, the resistance to fascism is finally recognized. Until then, there had been no official recognition of those who had resisted fascism. I would like to add that a lot of the people who had resisted fascism, they didn't leave the prisons until 1975. I am running out of time. So we can carry on. Since the 1980s, Greece joined the European Union. It is a member of the European Union. There's still a lot of things about Greek society that are very debatable. And I'm going to carry on. And, for example, the Roma remain excluded. There has been no development regarding the Roma population. Jews and Armenians, and, cultural minorities. We now have an influx of refugees and migrants. I'm running out of time, so I'll be quick. And some closing thoughts. Well, the last closing thought is that modern Greek society to this very day lives under the shadow of what happened in World War II. And this project is a good project because it's going to help us deal with that. Thank you very much. I will spare you.
May I ask you what of this broad approach to national history, what will be your focal points in the project?
We're going to look at migrants. We're going to look at contemporary affairs. So the migration level, how that is being dealt with by Greek society, if it's being dealt with at all. Well, it is being dealt with, but the pros and cons. We're going to look at how Greek society has dealt with its past and what issues in the past need dealing with. There is a gender element, which is very interesting. In the Second World War, a lot of women took up guns. They were very Amazon-like. One of the reactions was, you got all of these female partisans. Send them, put them in the grave. Get rid of them. So the women resist. A motivation to stop the resistance is because of the women. So that's a difficult topic to deal with, and we'll try and deal with it.
If I may, another question.
There's the Roma element, because that's often is not forgotten. Now, the Jewish community, again, there's a lot of things happened in Greece during the Second World War. There's a skeleton in the cupboards. How do you deal with the fact that those who collaborated in the pogrom got away with it? If you're Jewish and you're living in Greece, in Thessaloniki, and there's a community still, just 900 people, how do you deal with the wretched knowledge that those who control the city's economy benefited from the pogroming of your ancestors? That's how do you? We're talking about truth and well, the truth has never come out.
Yeah, it's a bit parallel to what Matt presented. Another question to you, and this is also valid for Portugal. In the pan-European presentation of history, it was always the offer of then the European Economic Union. If you become a democracy, a full-fledged democracy, if you respect human rights, the door is open for membership, which in fact was.
Yeah.
Same for Portugal, same for Spain. You didn't mention this at all. Is this an element that
I ran out of time.
No.
I ran out of time.
But is this an element that you would include?
I think, again, that's a tricky question. That's a $100 million question, and it deserves a $100 million answer. In 1975, we became democratic, and we got a good constitution, which includes human rights and fundamental rights. In 1981, Andreas Papandreou comes to power, and one of his promises is we're going to take Greece out of NATO, and we're not going to join the European Economic Community. Of course, he did neither. And why didn't he take Greece out of NATO, and why did he bring Greece into the European Economic Community? One of the reasons he brought Greece into the Economic Community is because he wants to become more democratic. One of the reasons is he's worried about Turkey, so there's defense reasons. So he's looking for protection. And it was a government that was very nervous about another coup d'etat. I know because members of my family were involved. So there was that element of moving in. Getting into Europe will safeguard those gains, which we now have enshrined in the Constitution.